are a driver in here, I wonder what kind of driver you are. Do you keep your fuel tank always full? Do you fill it to the top and try to sort of top it up if it's getting a bit low? Or are you a bit like me, where you sort of run it into the zero and see how long you can go before you top up the fuel gauge? That's sometimes a bit of a dangerous game. My car tells me how many miles I have left in the tank, and sometimes it gets quite low and I think I really must go and get some fuel now. And there's been times where that's nearly caught me out, where there hasn't been a fuel station anywhere near, and you have that niggling worry that you're going to all of a sudden run out of petrol somewhere and be stranded just because you hadn't topped up your tank. Well, today I want to talk to you about Daniel in the Bible, and he was somebody who was consistent. And a little bit like that analogy with driving, a good way to live our lives as Christians is to remain topped up. No matter what you think about driving, whether you're the type of driver that likes to be full of fuel or if you like to live on the edge a little bit, it's not a good way to live our Christian lives. Actually, if we want to be consistent in our faith and consistent in our Christian walk, we need to make sure that we are fueled and topped up. And a great way to do that, a really important part of our faith, is through prayer. And I want to look at Daniel and ways that Daniel's was consistent, and one of the ways was in prayer. He continued to pray and continued to input into his relationship with God, fueled and ready to go. So I want to look at 3 things that Daniel was consistent in his life, and we're going to have a little bit of a look at parts of the story, but if you want to read it a little bit more fully, you can find it in the Bible in Daniel. So that's pretty easy. So first of all, Daniel was consistent in the everyday. Daniel's consistency, as I've already said, flowed from his prayer life. He prayed 3 times a day, which was the custom, and he prioritized prayer. You know, routine can sometimes feel like it's a bit of a boring thing, like having a routine. But routine sometimes, when it's done right and it's with the right things, is the bedrock of forming good habits. And when we consistently do something, it builds up. So I've got a picture of a guy on the screen. He's called Zach Hamble, and when he was 3 years old, he started to build an elastic band ball, and as you can see from the picture here, it got rather big. He didn't do it all in one go. As you can see, he's not looking like he's 3 anymore there. He's now 35 years old, and it took him 32 years to build his elastic band ball. It's not the biggest in the world, but it is pretty big. And you know, that is just from doing something over and over again consistently. And it's a picture of what can happen when we form good habits and are consistent with them. Actually, it can create, might seem small at first, but it can create something big in our life. And there's a quote which says, success doesn't come from what you do occasionally, it comes from what you do consistently. And I want to challenge us this morning that when we get our prayer life consistent, it builds something great inside us, which means we're fueled and ready to go no matter what happens. What we do consistently matters. If we only pray when we feel like it, then our Christian lives end up being run just by our feelings, and our disciplines, go up and down. We don't do as we say we're going to do, because discipline is making a decision and then following it through. And you can be guaranteed that if you make a decision, you're going to form a good habit, whatever it is, you're going to eat better, go to the gym, whatever, there's going to be a point where you don't feel like doing that thing. And that's the key with consistency. It's making the decision, but then it's following it through. There might be something that you can help your future self do to follow your decisions through. So for example, if you go, right, I'm going to start praying every morning, I'm going to get up early and I'm going to make sure I spend some time in prayer. Guaranteed the morning when you get up, you're not going to feel like that. You're going to feel like pressing snooze and having another 5 minutes in bed. But maybe there's something you can do to help your future self. So for example, I have busy mornings. I get my children ready for school, make sure everything is running okay in the house, and I make the packed lunches. One thing I know that if I do the packed lunches the night before, I know I'm giving myself space in the morning to be able to spend that extra time in prayer. You know, maybe for you it's leave your Bible on your bedside table so you can see it when you wake up. Sometimes it can be something as small as we can't be bothered to go to a different room to grab our Bible. Set yourself up. Well, maybe for you it's set an alarm on the other side of the room where you have to get out of bed and turn it off. You know, there's other things we can do in our life to help our consistent habits. So, for example, there's plenty of resources now that can help us in our prayer life. Some apps that have streaks on them. I know that helps me. You get a little tick if you've done something that day, and that's a good motivator. Maybe it's calendaring in or diarying in some time to spend with God, going somewhere where there's no distractions to help keep your prayer life consistent. What is it for you? What could you do today that could help you have a more consistent prayer life tomorrow? So Daniel was consistent in the everyday, in the ordinary. The second thing is that Daniel was consistent in change. So Daniel was a captive in Babylon. He'd been taken from everything that he knew and brought to a different land and immersed into a new culture. It must have been a huge change for Daniel, taken away from the people that he knew, the customs that he knew. But Daniel wasn't afraid to be counter-cultural and to speak up when he believed something. We can see that in the case of the king. He was brought into the king's court and they were all eating lots of rich foods. But Daniel believed that wasn't the best thing for them. He believed that eating vegetables and having a healthy diet was better. So he was not afraid to challenge that cultural norm. And he talked to the supervisor there, and even he was a bit like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to go against what the king's saying. So Daniel said to him, let's try it. Put my men on this special diet for a bit and see if we look stronger and healthier. And sure enough, after 10 days, they did. And so they brought in this new diet. But what I love about Daniel is he was in a completely different culture, taken out of what he knew, but he wasn't afraid to stand up for what he believed. It says in Romans 12 and verse 2, don't copy the behaviour and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. When the culture says one thing, we need to be clear about what God's voice is saying to us. You know, it's easy to drift. A few weeks ago we were on holiday in Cornwall and we went bodyboarding, and so we were catching the waves as they came. And the thing about the waves is that they can take you in a certain direction without you knowing, and you can actually begin to drift. So unless you keep your eye on it, you can start one end and they have the flags out to tell you where it's safe and where the lifeguards are, and before you know it you can end up way past the flags and you come out of the water and you're thinking, where were we camped, where's our stuff? Because the drift of the water takes you in a different direction without you even realising it. It's something you need to keep your eye on. Our culture can be a little bit like that. Our culture doesn't always line up with what the Bible tells us we should be doing or how we should act or live. In many ways, the law does support what the Bible says, but there's times when it doesn't. And we've seen recently a shift in law, a shift in culture, maybe drifting away from the Bible and what God said, particularly in terms of the care at end of life and beginning of life, and some of the laws have shifted recently. And sometimes it's said in really clever ways as well, and wording which makes you think, oh, well, that sounds right and that sounds good. But unless we have a really good, consistent prayer life, and we're reading our Bible and we're standing on the truth, the thing is we can drift without even realising it. We can start to believe maybe what the culture's telling us, what the government might be telling us, what our friends might be telling us who don't know God. And actually what we need to do is stand firm on the word. You see, when we all decide what we think is right or wrong, we're not the ultimate authority on that. When we all can choose what we think, it can be chaos, but actually God is the only one who can define right and wrong. So we need to make sure we're not drifting. We're not drifting away from God in our relationship with him. We're not drifting away from the truth of his word, of what he's asked us. And like that analogy in the water, sometimes we can drift without knowing it. But how we can stay strong and consistent is by keeping our prayer life consistent, keeping in the word and standing firm, not being afraid to challenge what the culture's saying, but actually, as that verse says there, don't copy the behaviour and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Are your thoughts in line with God? Are your thoughts in line with the Bible? Are you thinking the way that God wants you to think about yourself, about other people, about issues of right and wrong. Daniel did not drift, even though he was taken from one culture into a completely different world. He did not drift from what God had asked him, and I think that was because of his consistent prayer life. So are there any areas in your life where you might have drifted from God's way of thinking without even realising it? Perhaps other voices have been louder than God's voice in your thinking. Have a think about that and open your heart up and ask God for help with that. And then the third thing was that Daniel was consistent in persecution. And so what happened in the story after the diet thing, the king really loved Daniel. He thought a lot of him, and people were jealous of that, so they tried to catch him out. And I'm sure this is a story you're all familiar with, of Daniel and the lion's den. And so how they try and catch him out is his prayer life, because they know he's so consistent in prayer. So they get the king to make a decree that anybody bowing down to God, anyone praying, will get thrown into the lion's den. And of course, Daniel doesn't change what he does, he continues. It says in Daniel 6 and verse 10, "Now when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." Wow, how amazing is that passage? Nothing changed for Daniel. The fear of death, the fear of getting thrown into the lion's den. I don't know about you, like Daniel was a courageous person, but I would have just thought about maybe moving out the way of the window when I prayed. I feel like I would still pray, but maybe I would have hidden a little bit. I don't know what you think, but Daniel was so bold. He wasn't for a minute going to bow down to another god. He wasn't for a minute going to stop his prayer life. In front of the window for everyone to see, he kneeled down 3 times a day, and just as he had done before. Daniel was so consistent. No matter what change came in his life, he continued with his prayer life. And whatever changes we face, we can do that. We can make a commitment to keep our prayer life sharp, to keep our life with God good, and that connection there. It doesn't always have to take a long time, if we're short of time, if we're busy, but making sure we just spend those few minutes, perhaps in the morning, perhaps in the middle of the day, perhaps before bed, just saying to God, God, I'm aware of your presence, I want to connect with you, and just making sure we're right before God. Nothing changed for Daniel. He remained consistent in his prayer life, even in the face of persecution. Here's the thing. Daniel stayed the same, but when persecution happened and he went and he carried on his prayer life, and that persecution that happened made his influence greater. So even though he was doing the same thing, because of that persecution, all of a sudden he had this amazing influence. So then the end of the story, of course, is that Daniel gets caught, he gets thrown in the lion's den, but God closes the mouths of the lions. And that miracle was such a great witness in the story that the king was amazed. The king didn't want Daniel to die. He thought a lot of Daniel, but he couldn't go back on what he'd said. And God saved Daniel in this amazing, miraculous way. And so afterwards, the king does this amazing decree that he sends out throughout the kingdom. And he says these words, "I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." And that's Daniel 6, verse 26 to 27. Amazing, this king that didn't know God, this completely different culture, completely different worship and all those things. And then in the face of this persecution, Daniel is consistent, stands up for his faith. And what comes about after that is this king sees God for the first time properly and says, we need to worship this God. He is amazing. Sends out a decree to everyone. What an amazing result for Daniel. And for us, I think we can be encouraged. Sometimes we might face a change in our lives. We might face a challenge. We might even face persecution ourselves. We might face bullying because we're a Christian. We might face people insulting us or hardships coming. But as we remain consistent, God, I believe, is going to increase our influence. As we stand consistent in the face of people maybe challenging us, our influence will increase and God will use it for his glory. So I want to encourage you today. Maybe things have changed in your life and you know you've got to keep that consistent prayer. Maybe things are tough right now. I want to encourage you, keep going, keep that connection, keep your prayer life strong, because that will sustain you. Don't be like me where you're driving around in your car and you're running out of fuel, but actually keep topped up. I wonder if there's any areas right now that you feel are hard, but maybe God is increasing your influence, and be encouraged by that. Just finish with a final quote from John Maxwell, and he says this: motivation gets you going, but discipline keeps you growing. That's the law of consistency. It doesn't matter how talented you are, it doesn't matter how many opportunities you receive. If you want to grow, consistency is key. So hopefully we can take away some thoughts from Daniel this morning, that his consistent prayer life kept him going through some really tough times. It increased his influence. It helped him stand against the culture, and it was what connected him to God. So what can you do today to help your prayer life, your life with God, remain consistent?